Hello and welcome to review 10C. I'm the Whiskey Anorak. I'm sat in my bedroom and I'm ready to do a comparison between Springbank 10, which was the subject of review 10A, and I'm going to be comparing it to Campbeltown Loch, which is a blended malt from Campbeltown. I'll give you the full details in a second. And I'm also going to be comparing it to the winner of the public vote, which is the Kilkerran 12. So thank you very much for voting. And it's much appreciated with you actually putting votes in, and it's good to be able to be having a look at the whiskey that's been selected by yourselves as the top choice for the comparison to the Springbank 10. So why am I doing these comparisons every single time I do a review? If you're new here, I do part A is the review, part B is further information, and part C is comparisons. But why do comparisons? It's for a couple of reasons, but mainly because comparing a whiskey to another whiskey, or even sometimes to beer, because I've done that before on this channel, or to a sherry, or to whatever it may be, but directly comparing between two or more spirits or drinks is a really good way to identify similarities and differences directly with your senses, rather than relying on your memory, which can be a little bit faulty. Because sometimes, for example, I could have a glass of Kilkerran 12, I could be drinking it and I could think, this really reminds me of Springbank quite a bit. I'm getting quite a few notes from it. It's got that farminess to it. It's got a slightly heavy oiliness to it, and it pretty much seems very similar to Springbank. But only by actually comparing the two directly do you see that that is not the case, and it certainly isn't the case. It's very different actually, although it does have some similarities. So what I do before these reviews, before I do the comparison reviews, is I will do a comparison between the main review whiskey or spirit and my choice, and I will also try and get at least one or two in between the options that are out for the public vote as well. So I think that's a very good way to learn. I do think that that's something that we should try and include in our whiskey journey at least once or twice a week. I think it's also important to be able to just have a whiskey in isolation as well and appreciate it just for how it is. And probably about 70 to 80% of the time, that is what I do. I just have a whiskey on its own, and if I have a second one, I'll have that one on its own as well. But a couple of times a week when I do these reviews, these comparison reviews, I will have a little bit of a comparison, because I just think it keeps you on your toes and it just keeps you, keeps you in with just learning really, and just getting to know whiskies a little bit better by that comparison. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour a little bit of each one. I'm going to smell, I'm going to give you the sensations and the taste notes as well. I'm also going to start including something else a bit more clearly, which is I'm going to talk about texture a little bit more as well, because that's something that's very important with whiskey. And I do mention it, I have mentioned it on all the reviews that I've done so far, but I usually mention it a little bit after I mention the smell and taste notes and the sensations. I usually just make a little comment as to whether it's oily or light and such like that. But I want to try and make a feature of discussing that. So in reviews going forward in this comparison, I'm going to make a special note of discussing the texture of the whiskey. And as it happens in the next series of reviews, the 11 series of reviews, I'm going to be reviewing a whiskey that's known for its texture, which might be a spoiler. You might be able to guess what it is if you know your whiskey. And in the part B episode of that, I'm going to be discussing particularly about different types of texture in whiskey and why we experience them the way that we do. Because it could be argued that sensations and texture is less open to interpretation than smell and taste is, so it's less subjective. It still is subjective, but perhaps not quite as subjective, in my opinion, as smell and taste. Because I think a lot of the time, if we have a whiskey that's oily, we can probably all agree that it's oily, or that it's thick, or that it dries our mouth out. But when you go to specific smell and taste notes that people find in whiskies, might be a little bit harder to get on the same page, apart from the basics, which is why on this channel I try just to focus on the basic smell and taste notes. There's a couple of reasons for that, but one of the main ones is because I want to try and make it clear that smell and taste in whiskey is only a little part of the story. Well, it's quite a big part really, but it's not the only part. The texture, the mouthfeel, and the sensations that you get from a whiskey are a massive part of it, because they're the delivery system that the smell and taste come in on. And if you have a whiskey that's been overly filtered and, you know, it's had colour added to it, you're going to notice in the mouthfeel predominantly, as well as in the smell and taste, but definitely in the feel of it, and it's going to make it a lesser experience. And if it's bottled at a lower strength, it will be a lesser experience as well. And by lower, I mean 40%. So anyway, let me get a little, so that I'm not waffling on too long before I start doing the actual comparison. You know, this is just my little channel where I just sit in my bedroom and talk about whiskey for, you know, half an hour or so on each episode. I do it because I love whiskey, and I just want to try and share my experience with you guys, because obviously I buy everything that I review, and I'm independent and I'm a bit cynical. So I think that's an okay combination for a reviewer to have, hopefully. So yeah, let's talk about the bottles a little bit. So this is what I reviewed in 10A, and I said about it that I would buy the same bottle again. I have done. So it's a really good bottling to showcase Springbank, and you could argue that it is the basic bottling in many ways, like the standard bottling the 10-year-old is. Bottled at 46%. My choice of comparison is the Campbeltown Loch, which is a blended malt. Now, just to remind ourselves, a blended malt is single malts from more than one distillery blended together, all produced from malted barley. There's no grain in there. This particular one is Campbeltown Loch, and this contains single malts only from Campbeltown, which limits it to 3 distilleries at the moment, which is Glengyle, which is the distillery that produces Kilkerran, Springbank, which produces Springbank, Longrow and Hazelburn styles, and also Glen Scotia as well. Now, I've heard rumour that this predominantly contains Kilkerran, but we don't know. Apparently, reading around, it's a closely guarded secret what the actual makeup of the blend is in here. I don't think it should be. I think that J&A Mitchell, you know, Springbank should let us know what the makeup is, to be honest, because Springbank and you know, Kilkerran, you don't really see it in independent bottlers. So even if they release the recipe, it's not like anyone's going to copy it and make a mint off it. You know what I mean? It's just not going to happen. So I think that they should be a bit more transparent, and they should tell us what the makeup is in the bottle, even if they don't tell us exactly what the cask types are, but just tell us how much percentage from Kilkerran, how much from Glen Scotia, you know, how much Longrow is in there, how much Hazelburn, how much Springbank. It'd be all useful information to know, and I think they should tell us. But just to give you a little bit more information about what it says in the bottle, this blended malt has been created solely from Campbeltown's 5 distinctive single malts, what I just discussed then. 100% Campbeltown whiskies, blended and bottled by Springbank Distillers, Campbeltown, Scotland, 46% alcohol. What else does it have in there? 100% Scotch whiskies. Does it say non-chill filtered natural colour? It actually doesn't. Just in case you're interested, this particular edition I have was bottled on the 1st of the 10th, 2025. And batch number 25/187. Yeah, it doesn't actually say it's non-chill filtered natural colour. From looking in the bottle, holding it up to the light, turning it upside down, and having a look like this, you can see this sediment floating around in there. And if you hold it up to the light, even if you don't do that, you'll see sediment. So it's definitely not been heavily filtered. It's not been chill filtered. It's not been heavily filtered. I don't think there's any caramel in there, but they should state on the bottle. So that's a bit disappointing. I didn't notice until now, actually, that I didn't say that on the bottle, but it should do. So it's a bit disappointing, really. But the reason I chose this is so that I can do a comparison to Springbank 10 and see what the differences are. Of course, there's going to be differences, but just to see, is it of the same quality in terms of bottling? I would say that it is, apart from the fact that it doesn't have the statement on there. The quality of what's in there is pretty high, in my opinion. But I just thought it'd be interesting to do a comparison to a blended malt, which probably contains at least a portion of this, and also the Kilkerran from Glengyle. So this one, I'll hold this up for you. I'll just turn it around for you as well. There you go. Okay. So this is a standard 12-year-old, also bottled at 46%. So every single whiskey here is, so it's quite a fair comparison, to be honest. And I'll just read this out, this statement that it says on here. It's the first time I've had Kilkerran on this channel, so I'll read the back of the bottle out. It does say not chill filtered, no added colouring. bottled at 46%. Mitchell's Glengyle Limited are very proud to be continuing and adding to the great Campbeltown distilling tradition, and the choice of name reflects that. Kilkerran is derived from the Gaelic Cian Loch Kilkerran, I butchered that, I know, which is the name of the original settlement where St. Kieran had his religious cell and Campbeltown now stands. A bit of history for you there. Kilkerran is thought to be a suitable name for a new Campbeltown malt, since it was unusual for the old Campbeltown distilleries to be called after a glen, a custom more usually associated with the Speyside region. Is that a little dig at Glen Scotia? Because I think the company that owns Glen Scotia actually have the rights to Glengyle, so they couldn't use that name to call the whiskey, so that's why they chose Kilkerran. So yeah, there's a little bit of slight subtle hint to that there, I think. So it was established in 2004, so 22 years this has been going now. Kilkerran, just in case you don't know, I discussed Springbank on part A, and so we know about that. Kilkerran, Glengyle, essentially it's run by the same people as owns Springbank. It uses the same workers. It operates in the period where there's maintenance going on Springbank itself for a few months towards the end of the year. Normally that is, I believe. It's basically a slightly more modern version of Springbank. It mostly uses malted barley for the malting floor at Springbank, but not completely. It depends on how much stock they've got of the malt that year. Sometimes they do buy it in from external sources. This particular one is 70% bourbon cask, 30% sherry, although it doesn't give you that information on the bottle. You have to go and look for it online. It should be on the bottle, the same way that it should be on the bottle for the Springbank. Like I discussed in part A review, you know, Springbank and Kilkerran should give you more information than what they do, in my opinion, on the bottle. It's not good enough these days. We want a bit more detail as whiskey nerds and anoraks, don't we? I think we do. But yeah, you can find the information online, but there should be more on the bottle. So Kilkerran, Glengyle, they do not have worm tubs, they do not have a direct fired still, they do not use a 2.5 time distillation process like they do with Springbank. It's a bit more simple in that way. The stills, instead of having a slightly descending line arm, they have slightly ascending line arm, so it's going to be a little bit lighter. The stills are of a different design as well, which they got from another distillery. I'll go into that when I review Kilkerran. I'll talk all about that at the time. So yeah, but there are parallels, so I thought, you know, putting this option up there for the vote would be a good way to compare. So anyway, I've talked enough. I'm going to smell all of them. In fact, yeah, I'm going to smell all of them. I'm going to have a sip. I'm going to give you sensations, tell you about the texture of each one, and then I'm going to get into the taste notes. I'll then add water and I'll do the same thing. I hope that sounds okay. Okay, the Springbank 10, just to remind ourselves. It's malty, it's quite fruity, it's got that subtle hint of peat in the background, which I know will grow in a bit of time. It's a bit herbal. It's got an almost greasy smelling nose, like a bit oily. I'm detecting some sherry presence there, there's some vanilla, there's some oak. It's a well-rounded nose, to be honest. Let's try the Kilkerran 12 in comparison. More closed initially. Now, when this bottle was full, and I talked about this in the B episode about fill levels, this Springbank 10 was a little bit more closed too, but as it's gone down a bit more, it is getting a bit more instantly expressive. The Kilkerran, I've had less of it, but I do think it's just slightly more restrained initially. It does need a bit of water to start coming out of itself a bit more. But the maltiness is there. It's not as oily on the nose as the Springbank. I'm not getting as much sherry, but there is a hint there. I'm getting more of a bourbon forward nose on this one. This is lightly peated, but I'm not getting much on the nose. It smells essentially lighter than the Springbank. Okay, let me smell the Campbeltown Loch and I'll compare that to the Springbank, and then I'll do a quick comparison between these two as well. Okay, so the Campbeltown Loch. Orange. More of a sherry influence. I'm not sure of the cask makeup here, whether I'm guessing it's going to be a mix between sherry and bourbon, but I don't know the percentage. Quite a creamy nose, to be honest. Malty as well. There's quite a lot going on there. More expressive than the Kilkerran initially, that's for sure. Little bit of a herbal quality as well. So far at this point, I'm not getting any of that Campbeltown funk. I know that the Kilkerran 12 out of all three of these is probably the strongest in that regard, but at the moment, before I've added water, I'm not getting any of that from all three of them. There's a little bit of a touch of mustiness in the background of the Springbank, but the Campbeltown Loch does not have that at the moment. It's a little bit more fruity, I would say. Yeah, I'm definitely getting a bit more of the peat coming from this one now. Like a smoky peat. There is peat here in this one, but it's a lot reduced from the Springbank. Yeah, quite pleasant. Let me just compare it to the Kilkerran and then I'll give you some sensations. Right. It's a bit of an almost sort of gluey note to that. I'm getting a little bit of that farmy sort of note coming out a little bit, but it's definitely quite bourbon dominated, that nose. In direct comparison to the Campbeltown Loch, I would say I can detect more sherry here. It's a bit of a bolder nose on this, I would say. This is lighter. It's a bit of floral to it as well. I'm not getting much floral from the Campbeltown Loch. Okay, so they're quite different, all three of them, to be fair. If I didn't know, I think Springbank I can identify quite well because I'm quite used to it. I think I could probably identify that blind, although I've never actually tried doing that. I should, really. But yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to identify that, you know, this contains Springbank on its own, because it is quite different from Springbank. And when you directly compare the nose on all three of them, it's quite wildly different. So what I'll do sensations for all three next. So for the Springbank 10, salty, slightly sweet, sour, bitter, intense sour as well. The salt runs right through. The sweetness dies off quite quickly. There's some savoury there as well towards the end. It's very complex. I'm just describing it to you like that, as if it's one after the other. And it is a little bit in a sense, but it's quite up and down with the, like, at 1 second I'm noticing the sour, then the bitter, and it's a bit of a, it's not a mess. it's dynamic. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different flavour notes, which when I'm trying to focus on the sensation, I'm ignoring purposely the smell, the taste notes. I'm just trying to focus on the sensations on my tongue, basically. Which is quite hard to do at first. It took me a while to be able to ignore that, because I wanted to pay attention to the smell and taste notes when I first got into whiskey. But as I've got more into it over the, nearly, 17 years I've been drinking whiskey for, I found that after several years into my journey, I could switch off that little bit, and it's important to try and do, because you can really access and identify what's going on with a whiskey separate from the smell and taste. So it's quite a dynamic sensation range with the Springbank 10. Let's see if the Kilkerran 12 has a similar sensation range. Sweeter, absolutely. The salt's still there. There's still sour and there's still bitter. I would probably say there's more bitter than sour, but it's less intense than the sour. There's less savoury as well. I'm not getting as much savoury from that. It's quite different. I would say it's not as dynamic it sort of flows a bit more smoother with the sensations. Yeah, very, very different to the Springbank actually. Very different. Let's try the Campbeltown Loch sensations. Sweet, savoury, salt. Interesting because the savour is at the front end here. That sour bitter interplay is still there, not as pronounced as in the Springbank, but it's still there. It's there more than it is in the Kilkerran. Directly comparing sensations like that, I can, just from focus on that, there is a parallel here. Less of a parallel between these two. This sort of stands on its own a little bit more, I would say, in terms of the sensations being different. Yeah, I'll talk about the texture as well, because that's, as I mentioned, that's going to be something I'm going to be making a point of in my reviews going forward, so I might as well mention it now. So the texture of the Springbank, and by texture I mean the mouthfeel. Does it feel light? Does it feel creamy? Is it oily? Is it waxy? Is it somewhere in the middle? You know, most whiskies have a mix of all of those, to be fair, but there's usually one that it is more than the others. So let's see, in the case of the Springbank 10. I describe it as oily. There's a bit of a drying effect from the tannins in the wood, from the cask, but it doesn't leave your mouth dry. You can sense a little touch of dryness, which I'll go into the reasons for that in part 11B, which will be coming up in a few days after this. Yeah, it's not that drying, but it's oily, but I wouldn't say it's heavy oil. I'd say it's a sort of medium sort of oiliness. It's not light. There's also a touch of creaminess to it as well. To summarise the texture for this, I'd say it's oily, touch of sort of creaminess. Yeah, that's what I describe it as. Let's try the Kilkerran, the texture for this one. Less heavy. Still some oiliness to it, but I'd describe it more creamy than oily, to be honest. If that makes sense. Creamy is more, it's thick, but it's not quite as mouth coating perhaps as oil. That's how I think of it in my head. And yeah, it's not waxy. It's light oil cream. That's what I describe it as, to be honest. And the texture for the Campbeltown Loch. Also pretty oily, to be honest. It's not light, definitely not. Yeah, it's a bit creamy as well. But out of all three, I would say that the Springbank is the oiliest in terms of feeling thicker in the mouth. I'd say that it also probably dries your mouth out a touch more than the other two, which tend to leave it feeling wet. I should have mentioned that. Like the aftertaste here, I'm left with like an oily, yeah, it's definitely not dry anyway, whereas there's a touch of drying to this, even though it also coats the mouth. So yeah, so the texture is quite different in them, although it's in the same ballpark of being like an oily sort of style of whiskey. It's certainly not thin. They're all bottled at 46%, and yeah, I wouldn't say that I detect any sort of thinness to them. So just before I add the water, getting ahead of myself then, I will just give you the smell and the taste notes for all three, and then I'll add a bit of water. Malty, peat smoke, Highland peat. It's got some citrus in there, has got some orange. It's got a savoury, malty, dynamic profile, to be honest, that changes in time. Where we are now without any water, the peat is not at the forefront. It's probably going to come out a little bit more when I add water to it. Yeah, on this channel I don't give massively detailed smell and taste notes, as I mentioned earlier. I try to just keep it a bit more basic because you know, I don't want to go off on a tangent and start talking about 40 different poetic smell and taste notes when I can spend that time talking more about the quality of what's in the bottle and the things other than smell and taste, which are a little bit less subjective in my opinion. So, taste notes of the Kilkerran. It's more astringent, it's lighter, it's floral, it's honey. I'm getting that peat a little bit. There is, yeah, there's a lemon note to it as well on the taste. I wasn't really getting that much on the nose, like a citrus, but I'm definitely getting it on the taste. Very interesting. Let me just try the Campbeltown Loch, and then I will add some water. Greasy, malty, touch of like a machine oil sort of taste, like a greasy industrial taste. Orange, like an orange zest, orange peel sort of taste to it. It's a little bit of red fruits as well. Yeah, I'd say at the moment, in terms of the peat, the Springbank is probably the strongest, followed by the Campbeltown Loch. The peat's coming out towards the end. I'm not getting too much peat from the Kilkerran. There's a little bit there, but it's not too much. I just noticed I didn't really pour very much into this glass, so I'll just top it up ever so slightly. Okay, let's just add a little bit of water to these three. I'm only going to be adding a couple of drops because with Springbank, when it's bottled at 46%, I tend to not add too much water to it. I add a little bit over time, and the amount that I add in total to, like, say, a normal sized dram is probably about half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon, erring on the side of half. So when you add water to all of these, I'll just tell you a bit of information. I will tell you that the viscimmetry is pretty thick. It's I know from previous experience that it lasts a long time in the glass, which is a good sign that no oils have been extracted from the filtering process. The Kilkerran is exactly the same, and as is the Campbeltown Loch. Whilst this is opening up a little bit for a couple of minutes, J&A Mitchell, the way that they perform filtering across all of their brands, so, and all of the companies associated with them. So I'm talking about Springbank, I'm talking about Glengyle, and I'm talking about Cadenhead's independent bottlers. The way they filter their whiskey is how it should be, which is minimal. They don't filter it too much. I don't know what equipment that they use. I wish they were more open about it. I'm not saying that they're trying to hide it, but there's just not information out there showing you exactly what they use. If they just use, like, say, a muslin cloth, or, you know, of some description, or they use like some sort of metal mesh filter, like a stainless steel filter, I think it should be on the bottle rather than just saying unchill filtered, because it doesn't really tell you very much. But whatever they tell you on the bottle, you can see by looking, particularly in the Cadenhead's bottles, which are easy to see because they've got flat sides. So when you hold it up to the light, you can see straight through. There's no distortion, but like the lensing effect of the glass. You can see in all the bottles I've got, you can see sediment floating around in it, and it's really good to see. So they've got, across all the brands, they've got the same ethos regarding filtering and just leaving the whiskey as it is, just getting the big bits out of there. You know, another bottler that I've noticed recently who's doing a good job with that, Woodrows are pretty good, of Edinburgh. I've noticed that a lot of those bottles have sediment floating around in them. Another one is James Eady. That's probably one of the best, apart from Cadenhead's, in terms of holding the bottle up and seeing that there's just particles suspended in there. It's just a sign that these bottlers are not filtering very much. They're probably just using a muslin cloth. As a side point, I noticed the other day there was a video posted about Circumstance Distillery, which is a distillery based in Brighton in England. And basically I'm just grabbing a pen because I like to wave something around whilst I'm talking, otherwise I'll just be touching the bottles and stuff. Yeah, they posted a video of how they bottle all of their bottles, and essentially it just showed them with a measuring jug, then like a measuring cylinder, pouring in the required amount, 700 ml, and then essentially putting a funnel in a bottle that was lined with a muslin cloth and just pouring the measuring cylinder into the funnel and into the bottle, just using a muslin cloth, which is obviously a cloth which has gaps in it to allow all the oils through. And when you look in their bottlings, you can see little bits floating around, you can see oil suspended in it, and it's the way that it should be. And I wish they put it on their bottles as well. I think they do say non-chill filtered on circumstance bottles. I've got a few, and on the most recent one, which is 6 years old, they do mention that it's non-chill filtered, but they're all missing a trick. They should put filtered with a muslin cloth only. They've gone one step beyond circumstances. They've actually shown you the process directly. But, I just think that distilleries and bottlers should just be, a bit more transparent with how they're filtering and give us that information as well. Some bottlers that I've seen, which I think filter a bit too much, not excessively and not too much, and I'm sure it's non-chill filtered because you can see a little bit of sediment in the bottom. But some bottlers I've noticed who I think filter more than, say, Cadenheads or James Eady, for example, or Thompson Brothers. I don't see very much sediment in a lot of their bottles. They're doing a couple. I have in a couple. I've got about 15 bottles from them. I don't see very much. Another one is Signature 100. As much as I love that collection because it offers a really good value for money, and I've been introduced to a lot of distilleries from that collection which I hadn't tried before. When I look through the bottles there, they look quite clear. The liquid looks clear. I can't see any stuff floating in there. In a lot of cases, there is a little bit of sediment at the bottom, but I'm just wondering if whatever process they're using to filter it is just a little bit more on the harsh side compared to this. Now, that's not saying that it's bad whiskey or that they're doing anything overtly wrong. It's just that I'd prefer if they filtered less than what they do. And you can see it yourself. It's just practical common sense. You can hold up a bottle to the light, and if you see particles swimming around in it and just floating there, even without turning upside down, it's not been filtered as much as a whiskey that doesn't have that. It's just a fact. Does it mean it's better? No, it just means it's been less processed and it's been left more as it was when it was in the cask. And that's what matters to me. But anyway, that's a little bit of a rant. I do hope that Signature and Thompson Brothers reduce the amount of filtering that they do. As it isn't an issue, but I prefer whiskey to be rawer because I think it tastes better. Rant over. Okay, so let's do quick nose, quick sensations, quick textures, quick everything, quick taste, and then we'll call it a day. No idea how long I've been going on for, probably quite a while. So thank you for bearing with me. So on the nose, more peat as expected, more everything. With water, Springbank is a changeable whiskey. It's a chameleon. There's a lot going on in there, and it comes out of itself when you add water over time. But you'll get more fruit. You'll get more of a malty complexity. You'll get more complexity from the peat. Just more of everything, to be honest, after you add water. The Kilkerran. Less of a change, but there's more peat there. And you'll find this, the heavier a whiskey is, you tend to find that it changes more when you add water. Now, this does change, but it's just noticeably not as much as the Springbank. I'd say there's less maltiness, more peat. I'm getting the citrus on the nose now where I was only getting it on the taste before. The floral element's a bit more pronounced now as well. I can also see as a point that it's turned very cloudy as well, which is a great sign that it's obviously not been overly filtered. And I should say as well, regarding Signature and Thompson Brothers bottlings, they do turn cloudy when you add water, and they have generally really good symmetry. It's just that I just think that we should be seeing stuff floating around. If I'm seeing it in every single one of Cadenhead's bottlings that I've got, and it's, that's across all different casks, all different ages, I should be seeing it in Thompson Brothers bottlings as well as Signature, in my opinion, unless they're using some equipment which is filtering and taking out some of that, So, okay, so the Kilkerran, largely the same, a bit more peat, bit more floral, not as much change with the water on the nose as the Springbank. So let's see if the Campbeltown Loch has changed considerably or not. Yeah, it's more strong on the fruit, orange, bit of a strawberry note almost. It's malty, the peat's coming out a bit more as well. I'm getting a little bit of that sort of Campbeltown lactic sort of funk to it. I'm getting it also a little bit from these two, but it's not that intense yet. I expect it potentially to be more intense on the taste, to be honest. But yeah, not the one that's changed the most with the addition of water, at least at this stage, is the Springbank by far, I would say. Okay, let's see how the sensations have changed. Salty. I'd say the sweetness is still there a little bit. The sour bitter is not quite as intense, but it's still that quite dynamic up and down, and you've got the savoury towards the back as well. So I'd say the saltiness is less intense as well. So with the additional water, you do tend to find that the sensations can be diluted a little bit, but it's not by much, but it has changed a little bit. I'd definitely say it's a little bit sweeter at the start, a bit more savoury towards the end, and the sweet and the sour bitter is not quite as intense with the addition of water. The Kilkerran. Yeah, I'll probably say it's sweeter, bit less salty, sour bitter in balance, not too strong, and no savoury. Not picking up any savoury from that. Campbeltown Loch sensations. It's still got that savoury arrival, savoury salt arrival, some sweetness running through it. Not getting as much sour and a touch of bitter, but I'd say the sour and the bitter has reduced a bit, and it's more sweet, it's more salty savoury throughout, I would say. But let's quickly do the mouthfeel. Has that changed? It's still oily, still slightly drying, but the oil is overpowering that, and your mouth still feels coated, even though it's like a slight dryness to it. It tells me that there's been quite a lot of wood interaction in this case. Possibly they've been using more refill cask, so it's been absorbing more from the wood itself, but we don't know because we don't know the cask makeup, but that's what I'm thinking. Okay, sensations for the Kilkerran. Sorry, texture, I should say. Texture on the light oily side, some creaminess. Yeah, pretty much as before. And finally, the Campbeltown Loch, the texture. Medium oiliness, possibly a bit more creamy. Mouth coating, not very drying. Out of all three, I would say your mouth feels more coated with this one. After time, there's no dryness here, and the oiliness is a bit heavier than in the Kilkerran. So I'd say the texture on here is probably a little bit more satisfying. I would say if you like a thicker texture. If you like something lighter, then the Kilkerran is definitely a lighter oiliness to it, and the Springbank sits somewhere in the middle of the two, to be honest. So I'll just discuss the taste notes and then we'll call it a day after that. Okay, so the taste of the Springbank. Malty, citrus, orange, quite a bit more orange now actually. I'm getting more oak now, more vanilla. I'm getting some dried fruit, raisin. The peat has come out a bit more as well. I'm getting more of an earthiness to the peat as well. It's quite yeah, it's definitely enhanced by the addition of water, I would say. And if you leave it in the glass for a long period of time, you will see it change as well quite a lot. Kilkerran is not as changeable with the addition of water, I will say, but it's still not bad in terms of being changeable. I'll just have the last drop of this, give you the taste. Definitely more citrus and apple. And I also get, with the addition of water, I get almost like a grappa note, which is a spirit made from grape pulp. It's an Italian spirit made from the sort of pulp and the leftovers from wine production, essentially, like all the grapes and the skins and everything. I get quite a clear grappa note at the start, which is quite interesting. The citrus is there, it's floral, it's very different from Springbank on comparison. I am getting a touch of that sort of farmy note to it as well. I did get a little bit in the Springbank, but I'd say it's slightly more pronounced here, just like a bit of a musty, and it goes well with the sort of grappa note that I get as well. There's like a mustiness to it, which is quite satisfying. So the taste of the Campbeltown Loch. Orange. It's got a bit of a biscuitiness, caramel. Got like a shortbread sweetness to it a little bit, and the savoury. It's got, I can get in the sherry note a bit clearer as well now, actually. There's quite a lot going on there, to be honest. It's coastal as well. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I would say it stands up quite well to the Springbank 10, but it's a very different experience. You know, I would guess that it's predominantly Springbank and Kilkerran with perhaps a dash of Glen-Scotia in, but I don't know. You know, the two very different experiences, but if you could only get your hands on Campbeltown Loch, you definitely won't be disappointed. I don't think it's just as good quality as the Springbank and the Kilkerran. It's different though, and from what I've read from people online, because I've only ever had this once before, this is the first bottle I've had of it, there is quite a lot of batch variation in terms of taste, in terms of the colour, which obviously doesn't matter too much, but the cask makeup they use for each time they make it is different. That's probably part of the reason that they don't they don't let people know what it is, because they change it every time depending to try and get to a certain taste profile. But it's definitely interesting, and it's very interesting to compare to Springbank and to Kilkerran. The Kilkerran, it's definitely fruitier, more floral, and I think it's quite an interesting counterpoint to Springbank, where it shares some of the traits, but it's produced in quite a different way, and it shows, and in different stills as well. So it's quite, if you tasted it in isolation, and you were quite used to Springbank, you might think, oh, this is quite similar to Springbank, but actually directly comparing it, it's really not. It's very, very different, although it shares some markers that are similar. So that's pretty much it for the comparison. I hope that was interesting. What I normally do after I record these, by the way, I've not mentioned this before, but normally I do this. There's not much left, to be fair, because I poured a very small amount of each one. But what I do at the end is I pour everything into a glass, and I just try it over the course of the next half an hour to an hour, and I find that can have some quite interesting results. So I recommend that if you're if you're comparing whiskies, to mix them together as well and see how that is. If you've only got one bottle of whiskey, you can still compare that. You can pour it, put some water in it, leave it for half an hour, and then pour a fresh glass and compare the fresh glass of the same whiskey to the one that you poured a while ago, and that's a great learning experience. Comparisons are very important in terms of increasing your knowledge about a whiskey, and I'll keep doing them in my Part Cs, as I have been doing, and I'll keep putting some whiskies out for the votes as well for you to choose from. It's all from my own collection, so there's nothing that I would say is rubbish, in my opinion. Maybe other people would say that some of them are, I don't know. But I'm quite careful generally about what I choose to buy. So, yeah. And as we should do our research before we buy a whiskey and try and find out as much as we can. That doesn't mean that we can't be caught out sometimes. I certainly have. And there is a couple of bottles that I got recently where I was caught out in a way. And if you don't do your research, you do leave yourself open for that. So anyway, next time I'm going to be In the next series of reviews, the 11 series of reviews, I'm going to be talking about texture. I'm going to be reviewing a famously textured whiskey in part 11A. In 11B, I'll be talking about texture in general in whiskey. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. So I really appreciate your time, and goodbye for now.